Welcome to Handmade History.
Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sonia.
And we are back after a break. Welcome to Season 2. This is episode number 19.
Today we are talking about historical low-waist and zero or no-waist garments.
And this episode is brought to you by Folkwear Patterns. Are you inspired by what you learn about on Handmade History? Ready to bring those techniques into your own sewing room? At Folkwear, we specialize in authentic sewing patterns for historic and folk clothing from around the world. Whether you're dreaming of an Edwardian bodice, a traditional dirndl, or an 18th century working dress, we have meticulously researched patterns that honor the original garment and construction methods. Plus, nearly every pattern includes options for traditional embellishments, from delicate embroidery to lace insertion, so you can create pieces that truly capture the spirit of their time and place. Visit folkwear.com, that's FOLKWEAR.com, and use code HANDMADE20 for 20% off your purchase. This code is good through the end of 2025. Folkwear, where history meets your hands. Thank you, Folkwear.
Thank you, Folkwear.
Sonia, before we jump in, I have a bit of good news to share.
Mm-hmm.
Handmade History was the runner-up for an award called the Mother Founder Scholarship. So, woohoo! This was a prize given by the authors of a book of the same title. Their names are Jennifer Jane Jones and Amanda Fernandez. And we were one of only 10 finalists for the prize. So we are really, really thrilled.
It's really great.
Yay!
Very exciting.
It was very exciting.
Have you started the book?
I have been reading it. Actually, I read the whole thing.
Wow.
And I found it very inspiring. It was very easy to read. It has there's 2 pages or 3, 2 to 4 pages for each person. And it's a profile of different mothers who have founded businesses. And there's photos. The photography is really beautiful. And then there's tips from each one. It's very easy to read. I just loved it. I picked it up and put it down and just kept reading it pretty much all weekend.
Yeah, I want to read it. I was looking at it and there seemed to be such a good diversity in the different businesses. So I was excited.
Yeah, huge range of different kind of businesses, from very small to very large.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
Cool. Okay, so let's get into the show. The inspiration for this episode came from an online class that I took from Christy Johnson of Mixed Color. It was a free course and it was really neat. It taught you how to make a shirt from a rectangle of cloth. So I made one and it was really quick, super fun, and it was really satisfying. And I just had 2 tiny triangles of fabric left over and a circle from where I cut out the neck. So I've been interested in low-waist or zero-waist garment design, but I thought that this was a good opportunity to learn some more about some of the historical low and zero-waist designs.
So first, let's start with, what is a low-waist or no-waist garment? It's an item of clothing that when it is made from a piece of fabric or other material, it uses up most of that material. There are few to no scraps left behind. This is a big contrast to typical modern apparel sewing, where you use a pattern that has lots of curves and typically leaves you with a lot of scraps. The shapes of low-waist or no-waist patterns, if the garment even requires a pattern, might fit together neatly like a puzzle or be made from simple shapes like rectangles. Sometimes the garment is made from a single piece of fabric that is folded or pleated or maybe pinned in place. And sometimes it is made of narrow widths of fabric that are seamed together. There are lots of interesting ways to design low or zero-waist garments. Liz Haywood, a modern zero-waist pattern designer and author, says, "With a zero-waist garment, the design, pattern, and layout are all made at the same time. The designing happens as the pattern and layout develop. The design reveals itself when the pattern is complete." The historical garments that we are going to talk about are closely connected to the fabrics made locally. The shapes that are created can be simple strips or rectangles, or they can be complex and fit together in interesting ways. For example, Haywood has a pattern for beret that includes non-rectangular shapes that are tessellated, so they all fit together perfectly.
So, a small sidebar, I realized while researching this that a fun way to think of a low or zero waist garment is when you knit or crochet a garment, because although you might have extra yarn at the end, you don't typically end up with extra fabric. And I just thought this was fun to think about because it seems kind of obvious. Knitting and crocheting takes a long time, and you would never purposefully knit or crochet extra fabric that you would then cut off and throw away. So that's just kind of a fun little thought experiment or parallel that we'll touch on again later. But today we will be talking about garments that are sewn from fabric or other materials, not hand knit or crocheted garments.
So historically, many patterns were low or zero waste. Originally, people were not solving the problem of how do I make a garment from a large amount of readily available fabric. They were solving the problem of creating something to wear to protect or decorate their bodies and creating fabric or modifying animal skins to do that. Before the rise of manufacturing in the 1800s, making fabric was much more costly and infinitely more time-consuming to make. People processed their own fibers, spun their own thread, and wove or knitted their own fabric. They might use animal pelts or leather, which required hunting and processing.
That being said, the amount of fabric used to make historic low or zero waste garments is not necessarily minimal, especially when made from woven fabric. Techniques often used in these garments include pleating and smocking, which allow you to move but require more fabric. And there might also be decorative ease. So low or no waste garments are not necessarily low fabric garments. And a modern example of this is a tutorial for a dress by By Hand London, which is a pattern company. This tutorial shows you how to make a shirred dress. So shirring is a method of sewing with elastic thread that gathers the fabric. It makes a really stretchy fabric that's easy to fit. And instead of putting in a zipper and a fitted bodice, you can just shirr a larger piece of fabric and easily get a top or dress off and on. And that's what this dress tutorial does. The tutorial is simple enough to be shared in a series of posts on Instagram stories, and the dress is constructed from rectangles of fabric. But despite the simplicity of the pattern, it looks beautiful and fancy. This dress requires at least 3 meters of fabric, which is just over 3¼ yards, and a more fitted dress might require 2 or 2½ yards, but really depends. So this is an example of a low-waist pattern having regular and decorative ease in the design.
Ancient low and no-waste garments often use several yards of fabric. This might seem nonsensical to us. If you're making your own fabric, wouldn't you want to make and use less of it? In fact, ancient garments were also often ornate and beautifully decorated. Elizabeth Wayland Barber writes in her book, Women's Work, quote, "Our surviving textiles from the Neolithic, which goes back to 7000 BCE, are astonishingly ornate. Clearly, Neolithic women were investing large amounts of extra time into their textile work, far beyond pure utility, despite the fact that humans at this time lived at a subsistence level." Two lines of thought are behind this, though there are certainly others. One is that making fabric, although time-consuming, is not necessarily physically demanding. Barber writes about spinning, for example. "Spinning, incidentally, is a very restful activity. That is a good thing, because it can take an enormous amount of time to make thread by hand. Like knitting, it can be pleasantly rhythmic and can be done sitting down with no physical exertion, just patience." So one can imagine textile production, at least parts of it, as being a not unpleasant way to pass time several thousand years ago. The second line of thought is that people had fewer garments and so could spend extra time making them extra beautiful. Barber writes that in rural Central Europe today, where people still weave their own cloth, quote, "One finds the attitude that if you have to make a bedspread or a cushion anyway and will have to use it for the rest of your life, you might as well make it pretty and be able to enjoy both the making and the using."
And to bring it back to low or no waste design, maybe because of the amount of work put into fabric making, scraps would be anathema. You wouldn't spend weeks or months of your life weaving a piece of fabric and then be okay with throwing a part of it away. So just like with knitting, I'm not going to put in time knitting a big chunk of fabric if I'm just going to cut it off and throw it away at the end. Sounds really terrible.
So now we're going to talk about some specific interesting historical low and no waste garments. And this list is by no means comprehensive. If you go back in your own family tree to your pre-industrial ancestors, so back to the 1700s or even 1800s, there's a good chance you will find some low and zero waste garments no matter where your ancestors are from.
Yes, these are just some highlights, and I tried to pick a variety in terms of culture, construction, and techniques. So we're going to start with garments made from animal skin. In particular, we're going to talk about bog ponchos. So there are a variety of garments that have been found incredibly well preserved on the bodies of people who died and were buried in peat bogs in Europe. These garments are made from woven fabric or from animal skin, and very old ones have been found in Denmark. Some date as far back as the 1300s BCE. They are very well preserved. You can even see the pattern of woven fabric precisely enough to know how it was woven and which way the thread was spun. And color was also preserved. If you listen to episode 16 on macrame and knotting, you may remember the Egtved girl. Egtved girl is the oldest known bog body, and it dates to 1370 BCE. She wore a knotted skirt, which was decorative, and she also wore a shirt, which was made out of leather. So we are going to talk about shirts like this one and other garments made out of animal pelts or leather. And a lot of the following comes from a huge book by Margaret Hald, who was an incredible researcher and the curator at the National Museum of Copenhagen from 1947 to 1967. She published a survey of all of the bog bodies found in Denmark and went into great depth on the garments and textiles found on each one. And a shout out to Liz Haywood, who shared this resource with me. Liz Haywood also has a great course on making patterns from historical garments, including those found on bog bodies.
We're going to talk about a unique, very low-waist garment, which we will call the bog poncho. The poncho is a garment that is essentially a rectangle folded in half with a hole cut for the neck opening. The poncho is seamed up on the sides with holes left for the arms. These bog ponchos are slightly different. The top part of the fabric is folded down and a hole is cut just like in a poncho. But then on the lower part of the fabric, the sides are cut, folded, or sewn on and wrapped around the front or back to make the body of the garment. And it's longer than a poncho, like a tunic or a long coat. And you can also cut out a portion of the front to make a jacket. The line drawing for the bog body jacket actually looks very stylish. Liz Haywood has 2 variations on bog ponchos in her course, and she calls this garment the bog coat.
The bog poncho or coat is very interesting because it was made from animal pelts, and the shape of the animal skin informed the shape of the garment. Some historians speculated that humans originally just put the animal pelt on in a very similar way to the animal itself. The animal's legs became sleeves and pant legs. And this is certainly possible. Designs for bog ponchos emerged from the shape of animal pelts, which include extra material around the legs when opened up. People cut out the basic shape needed to make a poncho like the one we described, but there was often full or circular sleeves because of the shape of the pelt.
Another detail of animal skin that influenced the design of a garment was the direction of the fur. In garments made from animal pelts, the fur typically goes down. This seemed like it would be easier to clean or wipe off. When humans cut the pelt and folded it into a garment, they sometimes cut, moved, and re-sewed portions of the pelt so that the direction of the fur matched. This is a similar idea to cutting out a pattern from fabric with nap, where you want the direction of the design of the fabric to match. And if you use velvet, you're familiar with this problem.
Yes. Clothes made out of fabric may have evolved from skin garments. There are details in woven garments found in very old Bronze Age burials that match details found in skin garments. For example, there was a band around the bottom of a woman's shirt that is similar to the bottom part of a bog poncho. It's possible that more modern garments also share details that originally came from skin garments. Hald mentions a Polish garment documented in 1929 called a gunia that has a seam across the chest the same way a bog poncho does. And a fun detail from Hald's research: to investigate how pelt garments might have evolved, she used a calf skin to make garments for a little boy in 2 different ways and took pictures of it. And when I saw these photos, I was just imagining the child of some National Museum of Copenhagen employee getting roped into modeling calfskin garments that day. He was very adorable. He looked like a good sport.
Never a dull moment. The rest of our garments are woven. The Tarkan dress is the oldest known woven garment, and it was made from linen. It is Egyptian, and it is almost 5,000 years old. It was discovered by Sir Flanders Petrie in 1913 in a tomb that had been plundered. And in 1977, it was rediscovered at the Victoria and Albert Museum and sewn onto transparent silk to preserve it. Alice Stevenson, curator of the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology, recently undertook a study to date it. She pulled out a 2.24 milligram sample of thread. And a quote, "You can't help but envision the whole thing unraveling before you." Working with researcher Michael Dee, she found that the dress dates to between 3482 to 3103 BCE.
Only the top part of the Tarkan dress, the shirt, survives. It includes pleats on the sleeves where it attaches to the bodice, and it has a V-neck. And it is constructed using a clever cutting and construction technique. The sleeve and bodice is made from one piece, The piece is a 5-sided shape that looks like a rectangle with a corner cut off. You have to have 2 of these pieces to make 2 sleeves, and you can rotate them so that they line up along a straight side. And since this was made from a woven linen, there is no nap. And to create the dress, you pleat a part of one side of the bodice, and then you attach it to the front and back of another rectangle of fabric, which forms the bottom of the shirt or skirt. And then I think you sew a seam along the underarm, and the pleats will allow the sleeve to move. They will give you ease, which will let you move your arms. And it also creates the V-neck. The Petrie Museum has a great downloadable resource for students and teachers, and it includes instructions to make the dress. A detail that I thought was interesting is that pleats were made without an iron by creasing the fabric while it was wet and then weighing it down and allowing it to dry.
Next, we'll talk about the toga, which was a Roman garment. It's very old. It was inherited from the Etruscans, a civilization that was also in what is now Italy, whose culture peaked around the 500s BC. It was worn by men and women, and eventually became the formal clothing worn by statesmen and rulers. It's worn over a tunic. The tunic was also a low-waist garment. It's 2 rectangles of cloth sewn together with armholes and neck holes left open. And the toga was made from an oval piece of wool that was woven just for this purpose. It was 12 to 16 square meters of fabric, which translates to up to 20 yards of fabric. And there's no fastenings or pins.
Yes, I watched a video on how to drape it, created by Dr. Mary Harlow of the University of Leicester. Basically, you wrap the fabric over your left shoulder and under your right arm. You pull up a piece of fabric in the center across the chest and drape it. And this part is called the umbo, and it makes a small pocket.
Although it sounds simple, it is not easy to do well, and enslaved people were specially trained to drape the toga.
In a similar vein, the peplos is a Greek no-waist garment made from a single piece of fabric. It was worn by men and women, and it appears in stone carvings as early as the 400s BCE. It is a long rectangle of fabric that is sewn into a tube. Then the top part of the tube is folded down. The fabric is pinned at the top, and it drapes down to make armholes, and a belt is worn around the waist. And this makes the garment have a little frill, like a peplum. So a peplum shirt or dress now has a small skirt attached around the bottom, and this small skirt is called the peplum. And the peplos is the origin of this word, which was first used in print in the mid-1600s and to refer to a little skirt like we do today in 1866.
I didn't know that.
I know, so fun, right?
Dang, yeah. I mean, the peplum shirts were like all the rage, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yes, the 2010s, I believe.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, a little bit before. Yeah.
Wild. Other traditional garments made from one single piece of fabric include the traditional Scottish kilt and plaid and the Indian sari. We talked about the kilt in episode 14, Scottish Clans and Tartans. Today we are going to talk about the sari. The sari dates as far back as the 2000s BCE. It is a long piece of fabric, 5.5 to 8 meters long and 1 meter wide. Since a yard is only slightly longer than a meter, it could almost be about 9 yards long. One common way of draping is to wrap the fabric around the waist and pleat it in the front, and then drape the fabric over the shoulder. However, there are many ways to drape it. You can even fold it so that it drapes between the legs, almost like pants. Now, women typically wear saris over a small blouse, which was a relatively modern addition. Now it is worn to special events, not typically every day. The sari is made from all types of fabric. It is often beautifully printed or embellished, and it can be see-through like a chiffon fabric or more opaque, and they are very beautiful.
Yes. Next, we're going to talk about some interesting garments made from much narrower fabric in Japan. So first, we're going to do a little bit of background on some of the traditional textile weaving in Japan. So traditional Japanese textiles are only about 14 inches or 37 centimeters wide. And modern Japanese textiles now include wider fabric like Western textiles, but traditionally textiles in Japan were woven on a narrow loom. They could be made from silk, cotton, hemp, and other bast fibers. Bast fibers include linden, elm, wisteria, ramie, banana, and paper mulberry trees. And I watched a video of a woman named Kaizawa Yukiko, who is a traditional Ainu weaver. The Ainu are a cultural group who live on Hokkaido Island, which is in northern Japan, as well as on nearby Sakhalin Island in Russia, and on the main island of Japan in the northern part. Yukiko has been weaving traditional textiles every day for more than 60 years, and she uses elm and linden. And in the video I watched, she used a backstrap loom, which you kind of tie around your back. Yukiko has been making thread since she was 5 years old. She said that making the thread is much more difficult than weaving the fabric. To make thread from elm, first you harvest the inner bark, which you can only do from May to June because the elm are too dry in other months. Then you boil the bark and soak it for several hours. Then you pull the bark apart into threads and attach the lengths to make longer thread. She says preparing the thread is about 90% of the work. And the weaving takes just 5 or 6 days, but preparing the thread takes days and days. And you can make 1 to 2 robes from a roll of cloth. The weaving is also difficult and requires skill. Yukiko says it's like it's live. Sometimes it's really easy to weave, and sometimes it's incredibly difficult. When it's hard to weave, it's impossible for a beginner to do it. Sometimes it's so hard, even I can't do it. And some of the things that are difficult about weaving include having to smooth the fabric and the thread, which is hard on your hands, and attaching the new thread smoothly. Yukiko weaves fabric for obi sashes, which are wide decorative sashes, as well as Ainu robes.
Ainu robes are traditional robes that have unique low-waist construction. Fabric is folded over from back to front to make the back and front panels. The sleeves are tapered, which contrasts with the kimono, which we will talk about in a minute. A collar and band are one piece and attached around the front of the garment. Appliques are added both to decorate and protect the garment from wear. And these appliques may imitate protective tattoos, which were historically part of the Ainu culture.
And we'll talk now about the kimono. The kimono has some similarities to the Ainu robe. It's also constructed from traditional narrow-width textiles, which are seamed together to create larger panels. And it's also folded over the shoulders to create the front and back from one long piece of fabric. The kimono emerged in the Heian period, which lasted from 794 to 1185, and it evolved from another garment called the kosode. The kosode was a silk garment with cylindrical sleeves. The sleeves of the kimono are wide and rectangular, and they are made from a rectangle of fabric folded over. The kimono does not fit tightly to the body, and you can construct it just using the height of the average person and a few measurements. If you have extra fabric, it can be folded under and saved in the garment itself in tucks that are called uchiyagi. I watched a man sew a kimono doing this uchiyagi. It was a very cool technique. And kimonos can be made from different fabrics to suit the season. You can have light linen in summer and heavier fabrics or more layers in winter. Kimono fashion blossomed in the Edo period, which lasted from 1603 to 1867. Color combinations showed social class, and people wore layers of kimono, especially the noble classes, sometimes up to 40 layers.
Wow.
Kimonos worn by the noble classes actually covered the hands, while working class people had more functional sleeves.
Because there are so many straight seams, you can also easily recycle a kimono. You can deconstruct it and tear the fabric into strips. Weaving with recycled fabric creates a textile called sakiori. You weave the recycled fabric with cotton or any type of bast thread. Sakiori textiles are durable and protective and are especially useful for outer garments like vests, jackets, and aprons. And they are often worn by people working outdoors, like lumberjacks, fishermen, and farmers.
Yes. So moving on, we have 2 more garments, both of which are European blouses. They are also constructed from rectangles, and they are both adjustable and designed to suit the width of locally woven fabric.
So we'll start with the Romanian blouse. It was added to the UNESCO representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2022, including the construction of the blouse and decorative embroidery done on the shoulders. It is typically made from a linen, cotton, hemp, or silk. And a quote from UNESCO says, "It juxtaposes a simple cut with rich and colorful ornamentations that are stitched using complex sewing techniques." The pattern for this is essentially a set of rectangles and strips cut from a single piece of cloth. A narrow strip is used to make a gusset for the underarm that allows you more room in the sleeves. Pieces are joined using horizontal, vertical, and diagonal seams. The sleeves are gathered at the cuffs to shape it. There's also smocking around the top of the dress. Smocking is basically a decorative and functional way of making a garment stretchy that uses no elastic. So you use small stitches to gather fabric, and you sew many lines of these stitches, which is very time-consuming but very pretty.
Similarly, another smocked blouse is the English smock. Again, this is constructed mostly from rectangles. And I found a great online exhibit of the smock at the website of the Museum of Rural English Life, which is at the University of Reading. The English smock originated in the medieval period, which lasted from 1066 to 1485, and it uses smocking to gather around the neck and the chest. Unlike the Romanian blouse, it has a yoke. It also has a collar and cuffs, and it can have pockets. Some smocks were reversible, and some are closed with buttons. And they were worn by farmers to protect clothing in the 1800s. But then they also became fashion. So there's a smocked frock that I found in the collections at the Met. And according to the Met, it was, quote, the direct inspiration for the Liberty smocked dress. So Liberty is a fabric company, and that was hugely influential in both fashion and sewing. And smocked frocks inspired modern smock dresses for women or children. I had a smock dress in the 90s. Did you have one, Sonia?
Probably. I mean, let me look up smock.
Maybe you had my old smocked dress.
Let me say.
I definitely remember a pink smocked dress, which I wore to like first grade.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I definitely had these.
Yeah, they're very cute.
For sure.
Folkwear actually has a pattern for a smocked frock, and it will show you how to do the hand smocking, and will also give you instructions to do machine gathering, which sounds to me very similar to shirring. So I think we have come full circle.
I think so.
So that is a brief overview of some interesting historical garments. What do you think, Sonia?
Oh, that was very fun. I love the idea of like no waist garments because I find patterns very overwhelming.
Oh.
Like when trying to do a sewing project. So the idea of like just kind of doing kind of like relative measurements and things like that is very interesting to me.
Yes, I have to say watching a video of someone making a kimono was really fascinating because the man making it was doing it on the floor of his house, and he didn't have a cutting board. He just used a measuring tape, and he just measured how long he needed and then just cut across. And since the fabric was only 14 inches wide, he would just fold it and then cut it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool.
So interesting. Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that Folkwear has a lot of great patterns for these types of garments. They have one for the Romanian blouse. We already talked about the English smock. They also have a pattern for Japanese field clothing, which has a pattern for no-waist pants called Mompei pants. And we didn't really talk about any pants today, but I was thinking that could be another episode. And you can find all of those patterns on Folkwear's website, folkwear.com. And as a Handmade History listener, don't forget you can use Handmade 20 for 20% off your purchase through the end of 2025.
So before we go, we have an exciting new segment to add to the show. We got listener mail. Dawn from Pennsylvania emailed us to tell us, thank you for your podcast on zines. It was very interesting. Then she shares that gospel tracts are a type of zine as they were often hand-produced, small booklets in history. One person who produced hand-drawn cartoon gospels tracts was Greg Laurie, who is still alive today.
Thank you for your email, Dawn. I think this is a very interesting subgenre of zines and one that I had not heard of.
Yeah, I also did not know. I mean, I do know a lot about the history of zines from that episode is what I realized. So I very much did not know about that subgenre.
Super cool. Well, thank you so much for listening. You can email us at handmadehistoryhosts, that's HOSTS, @gmail.com. You can also visit our website, handmadehistorypodcast.com, where we now have a contact form.
Nice.
Pretty handy. All right. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Bye.
All right.